there's an acer called Flamingo, something flamingo, and it's hectic. It's got flamingo pink stems to the leaves and to the young growth on the plant. The leaves are a combination of pink and cream and grey-green. And that sounds like a mess. I mean, it is a stunning plant. And I've just put 2 of them in the garden because they've got too big for the pots that they're in. And I've replaced them with another couple of acers, Acer aconitifolium. Now I've got these in pots. They'll be in pots for 3, maybe 4 years, and then they too will go in the garden and we'll start again. Because acers in pots, you can only do it for so long.
Hello and welcome to episode 117 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking rather smart in royal blue and purple, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Gosh, Thordis, you are just so kind to me, you really are. Enough of that rubbish. Over in Cambridgeshire, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson, looking absolutely beaming, as she always does on the occasions of these wonderful podcasts. But we've got a very special reason to be beaming today, haven't we?
We have. I am beaming from ear to ear because I have spent the last, 10 days immersed in this absolutely wonderful book. And we feature books on this podcast fairly regularly, but this is, I think, an extra special book, and you can see it sitting beside Alan on the video version. It's such a tome that it stands up on its own like a statue. And the co-author of this book is John Massey. He co-wrote it with Tomoo Mabuchi, and it is all about hepaticas, which is why we are going to dedicate this entire podcast to these diminutive darlings. Before we
might digress slightly, Thordis.
Well, we do tend to. It has been known. But before we get stuck into that, John, I think you might have a couple of middle names to share.
Yeah, Shane Wellings. My mum liked the cowboy Shane, I think, and that's why that got in there. And Wellings was her maiden name, and they hoped I would carry the name on, but I failed miserably, I'm afraid, unless you can count for my 2 wonderful dogs. Yeah.
Wellings is excellent. I'm glad for my son's sake that I didn't continue Fredrickson in his name. That wouldn't have worked quite so well as Wellings as a middle name. John, we are so excited to talk to you today. Obviously, you're really a guest who needs very little introduction, but for the 1 or 2 people listening or watching who for some reason don't know about Ashwood Nurseries, about all of your plant breeding and collecting, your passion for plants, just introduce us to you and your nursery and how this love of hepaticas got started in the first place.
Well, it isn't all me. Often people think all the breeding work at the nursery is what I've done. It's totally untrue. I always liken myself to one of my favourite books, Robert Graves' I, Claudius. I think he was the only Roman emperor that died naturally, if you can call syphilis natural, and he wasn't murdered, and because everyone thought he was an idiot and no problem. So I feel as though I've started. I suppose I've survived because I have so much fun doing what I do. People can't actually believe it's work, but it's all by chance. My mum always wanted me to have a profession. She was a teacher and they wanted me to be a doctor, and I had the privilege to going to a boarding school where I did look after my housemaster's garden, and I built a grass tennis court, which was all right as long as you didn't let the ball land and you volleyed it all the time. I often feel I'm the luckiest person in the world because all I've ever done is plants. My father actually bought the nursery to keep his gardener in a job, and I was still at school. My parents moved from a 6-acre garden to about 2/3 of an acre, and Mum felt she was quite happy just to look after that. So rather than finishing the gardener, Dad bought the nursery. He didn't like it. After a couple of weeks, he left, and my mum and a home help. Mrs. P ran the nursery, and I left school on the Friday and started on the Saturday. No training at all, but some of the best private tuition in the world. Wonderful people like Percy Picton, Colwell Morven, Christopher Lloyd, my dear friend Veronica Cross, who introduced me to the late Princess Sturza, who really, I wouldn't have started a garden if I hadn't had the privilege to meet her. She invited me over because she was mad on hellebores. And
John, just a minute. Whereabouts did Princess Sturza live?
the late, she's actually died in about 2 or 3 years ago. It's Varangeville-sur-Mer.
Oh, yeah.
It's not far from Dieppe. It's
Sounds like
Normandy.
very French, Frinton-on-Sea or something.
It is. It's absolutely. It's funny. This whole area attracted all the art people. Oh, the dogs have just come in. Hello, Wills. All the artists, the painters from the area. She was Norwegian lady who married a Romanian prince. She was just one of these incredibly strong lady gardeners, and she, as I said, invited. Now, there are quite a few of them. Sadly, a lot seem to be dying. I know Veronica took me to visit Primrose Warburg, and she said, don't be frightened. She can be a bit severe at times. And I, when I came out, I said to Veronica, you should have met my mother. But but to me, it was the greatest garden I've ever had the privilege to see.
Yeah.
And she'd have no seats, no ornaments. It was all done with plants. For her 90th birthday, we took her over a seat, and she thought it was a packing case and was looking in the car for the plants, and she couldn't believe that we would. And because she won the Norwegian mixed doubles championship with her son, and she plonked this on the tennis court, and it never escaped this netting fence.
You cross paths with the princess because of your great knowledge of hellebores, and of course lots of people will associate Ashwood with your phenomenal hellebores. And I think, although obviously you met hepaticas when you were little, you re-encountered them, I think, on a trip to Japan, or one of the ways you re-encountered them was going to talk about hellebores. It's like hellebores have been your route into your pathway drug to get to hepaticas.
Yeah. They really have like it's Kevin Belcher who does he's been breeding hellebores here for over 30 years, and I'm really proud of all the work he did. And I think if British growers have a fault, it's that they're too busy doing what they're doing to go and see what other people are doing. So in the beginning, before we started hellebores, really to create work for the staff during the winter months, because we never stopped anyone in the winter, and we did seed, and then hellebores, and I visited, there was Helen Ballard from Mathan Morven, Elizabeth Strangman, Washfield Nurseries down in Kent, Will McLuhan up at Stockport, and Robin and Sue White at Blackthorn. And I bought from them what I felt were the best that they were prepared to part with, and then handed them over to Kevin, and he did all the rest. It's just amazing how things happen. And Veronica Cross, I say, one of my great gardening friends who I missed. Did you meet her, Alan?
Yes.
You probably met her at Nico's, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, she was quite severe, but
Just to clarify,
was,
so that would have been a snowdrop lunch at Raveningham.
Yeah, it was a snowdrop lunch.
Well, just to give a brief description of Veronica, I mean, she was a very slim and bird-like little lady, really. I mean, there was no doubting her aristocratic bearing. She had this kind of way with her.
But
And when she spoke to
so
you, it was no nonsense. There was no sort of silly pleasantries or anything else. It was if we're talking about snowdrops, we're talking about snowdrops. Don't mention the color of my clothes or something, you know. And she was
yeah.
very direct.
Oh yeah. My favorite saying of hers was, "I have many faults, but being wrong isn't one of them." Uh, and that typified. She could get in the same clothes that she wore when she was at Oxford University.
Yeah.
Where, up until the day she died, and she did art there, but she said she wanted her her paintings to have value. So I think she did a 1 in 3 years, so that there'd be a huge demand for it later on. But she was a very, very special person, and she didn't know her parents, and I'm sure she probably was from some royal family.
Well, obviously a huge influence in the plant world and all these wonderful plants, the Galanthus Veronica cross.
I've got what?
You've
Yeah,
got
me too.
wasp, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, which is fantastic. She named that, I think, because a lot of people it described her as a bit waspish at times.
Well, to bring this round to your book, I think is one of the really lovely things about it is obviously there is a lot of science in there and it's very planty, but as we always find when we talk about plants, there are so many great people and great stories behind them. And this book is all of those stories. It's your experience of these fantastic trips where you're just having the time of your life spotting hepaticas in the wild. You've even got the cast of kind of characters, of mentors and friends that each get their own little bit at the back of the book. So you feel like you're really getting to know these plants inside and out and all of their backstory as well. So yeah, this book, how on earth long did it take you to put this together, My World of Hepaticas?
Oh gosh, it probably took about 10 years to actually finish it from when I wrote the first thing for everything down. And to start with, it nearly polished me off. I would never ever write another book. And what the amazing thing is that you learn is how much you don't know.
Yeah.
Do
That's
it.
life, John.
That is, yeah. But and now I'm finding it quite useful, because when I'm doing something and I've forgotten it with old age, I can look it up in the book again and make sure the spelling's right or everything like that. But I think the incredible thing was all the phenomenal help I had from people I'd never ever met. From in America, the lady in Poland who helped with the micropropagation, and she actually flew over because she was so keen to see what was going on, and we've remained friends. Tomoo is sort of 90 what odd years young, and he's very special. He's taught me so much, because the Japanese have this incredible observation for detail. And although I've had no formal horticultural education, I feel I've had these incredible tutors all the way through. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Can we share one of my favourite humorous moments in this book, which is it's hard to believe this actually happened, but when there was a new species or variety, whatever had been discovered, and your response was, "Oh no."
Well, yeah, well, it was Tomo came over pre-COVID every year to do some Hepatica crosses. Like I felt the collection was part his. And he said about this new Hepatica variety, which had been found near Mini Ashigara by a friend of his. And I saw the photos, and it was white, not looking terribly exciting. I think the biggest problem is that some people, they're very keen to name a new plant, and in any isolated population, of, say, Hepatica. I'm sure it's the same with most plants. You get this sort of constant inbreeding, and they're slightly different. But to me, I'm not sure whether that deserves a new name. But anyhow, Thomas said this had been named former candida, and I said, "Oh no." And he said, "How did you know?" And I said, "What?" He said, "It was Yoshi Ono that named it." And he's just written a book in half Japanese and half English, which he's just sent me, and he's named probably about 6 or 7 new sort of varieties and forms.
John, can I just ask a question? Which
Yeah.
half of the book is best, the English bit or the Japanese bit?
I don't know. Well, it's on alternate pages, but I can't understand it. It's like a super guy, Sebastian Urban. He's in the book. He looks after the gardens for the Seaman Foundation, the German engineers. He'd been over to Japan, and he said, "How do you converse with people in Japan?" And I said, "Well, I've never actually known a problem, because like the first time I went over, I met the Mr. Noda, and the only words he could say in English was 'let's go,' and he'd be sleeping on these tatami mats. He'd give me a gentle kick, and he'd sort of say 'let's go,' and that's it. But we never were actually short of conversation, because you were just looking at plants and having the most wonderful time in the world. You can learn so much from seeing a plant growing in the wild.
And you have been lucky enough to see, I should think, most of the hepaticas, maybe not quite all, but many of them in the wild, growing in all kinds of extraordinary places. Really, I suppose, before we go any further, we should sort of dig down a little bit into the different hepaticas, particularly
Yeah.
those which people might be able to grow here in the UK. Of course, we have got people watching and listening all over the world, so you might be able to grow more. But in the UK, there are a couple which we have better luck with, I suppose you could say.
And I think I've got those two, because it must be 10 years ago that from Ashwood's Nurseries I bought a few plants of each of one of the transsilvanica,
Yeah.
japonica, and a couple of nobilis varieties. Now they are in my garden. They're in the winter garden. I was very pleased to see, skimming through your book, I haven't read it properly yet because I only got it this week, and it was a lovely pre-birthday present from our dear friend Thordis here for me, which I thank her for, because there's something I really did want. But both of those varieties grow very well for me underneath the shade of deciduous trees.
Yes.
So that's the right kind of thing.
What they like is full sun when they flower, and then cool shade afterwards. So growing under deciduous trees and shrubs, very similar to hellebores, and the drainage is very, very important. So if you've got them on a bank, they automatically get good drainage. They're a snowmelt plant, so they'll take any amount of moisture now, but they want it to drain away as well.
Well, they've certainly had moisture this winter, John.
Oh God, it's well, we've shut the garden. We open because I've managed to turn the nursery and the garden into a charitable trust, so that when I pop my clogs, it can continue, because we've got so many great youngsters here. And we open the garden every Saturday for charity, half towards the Adam Greathead Fund, where we try and train a young horticulturist without any knowledge. I get mad that the National Trust won't interview anyone who hasn't got, say, level 3 RHS. There's nothing wrong with the academic side, but that doesn't make a good gardener.
Yes, but I mean, just because people have read a book and done some exams, I mean, you can't learn about gardening without getting your hands dirty. I learnt with my grandmother. And she became Granny Grey because of the alliteration, but really she was Grandma Fox. But she taught But she taught me all the things that I knew initially. That she sparked my interest in gardening from about 4 or 5 years old. My two hepaticas, transsilvanica and nobilis.
I've got some here. I've got a well. The kitchen is just full of hepaticas, the table and everything. But it's funny. The Princess Sturza arranged for me to go to Romania to look at Transsilvanica. Transsilvanica only grows in Romania, basically in the Carpathian Mountains and the few low-lying hills. And she arranged for this guy to take me around who couldn't believe that grown men wanted to climb a snowy slope looking at flowers and he also couldn't believe that hepaticas don't open till later in the day. And that's the thing with them. But they're mainly, all I saw were blue, but there's this very pale pink form. And there's also a white form.
Oh,
and the Transsilvanica, it grows by, it's a creeping rhizome, so it's much actual tougher, and the foliage is larger and quite variable. I always felt if God was to reinvent hepaticas, the flowers and leaves should come together, whereas generally the flowers come followed by the new foliage. And so we cut off the old foliage just before flowering, because otherwise it takes forever cutting round each flower. And
of course, the flowers are beautiful. And if you're listening to this and for some reason you don't know, I mean, I'd hasten you to either John's book or the video version of this to so that you can see all the lovely flowers. But the foliage is often absolutely astonishing as well, and very different from species to species.
Oh, definitely. But if I can find them, I've got all the species in the kitchen. But I think like the other species which you can grow easier outside is Hepatica nobilis. I say Transsilvanica has this very small area of distribution, whereas nobilis you can find throughout most of Europe, but sadly not in Great Britain, but through France, Italy, Austria, right the way up to the Volga River in Russia. And they're all the species are in the northern temperate zone. So from North America through Europe, then they sort of followed the Silk Road from Kyrgyzstan along to China, Korea, and like I always think of the Japanese as the epicenter of hepaticas.
Japonicas are, I suppose, the beating heart of your collection, but they're like the opposite end, I suppose, for people like me who hope to maybe grow hepaticas in as easy a way as possible. If you've got nobilis and transsilvanica, then japonica seems to be the sort of greenhouse, tender loving care hepatica.
Miffy.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of these strange things. There's a super nursery up in Yorkshire, and they grow them outside there. I gave some plants to Birmingham Botanics, and they grow the Japanese well there as well. I think they're perfectly cold hardy. It's how the weather varies. That, like last December, not this year, we went from +10 in the daytime to -11 at night, and that change killed a lot of things off. If it had happened a little bit later and we hadn't had the dry summer where nothing was growing, then we had the wet, warm autumn and everything was growing like fury, and then wham bang, Jack Frost came out and clobbered everything. And it's that change, that sudden change, which we tend to get in the Midlands. I don't know whether you get it as much in the Norfolk area. And that causes the problems. If you could reliably have the Japanese hepaticas underneath snow till spring came, then they would be fine. Like, this is the incredible thing. In 2016, we showed hepaticas at Chelsea.
I remember it well.
It was a dream I always wanted to do. It was a bit of a nightmare. To begin with, we did a trial run, and it was medium success. I bought this second-hand freezer trailer from this guy up in Liverpool, and I said to him, "Well, this is over the budget I was hoping to pay," and he said, "Well, I'll deliver it for free." So he basically gave me 250, 300 quid. He was so nice, and we put all the plants in with no lighting, and I put them all in with the foliage because I felt the foliage would protect them. Obviously, there's no textbook knowledge on this at all. I used to go in each week and spray them over just to keep the humidity off. And because we kept them at between 0 degrees and 0.5, and you don't get mildew at that level. You know, if it's really cold, nothing rots off. So we were lucky like that. And then fortnight before the show, we took all the plants out, God bless you, and they took all the foliage off and put them back in the fridge, and they looked just like alfalfa. They were sort of drawn, and a friend of mine said, "When are you going to pull out of Chelsea?" And I said, "Doubting Thomas, I think they'll be all right," because when you're bedding a plant in a display, it's quite useful as long as it isn't too tall. If it's that little bit taller, because you have to hide all the pots and everything there. But it turned out to be everything went to plan. I took the plants out of the freezer about 4 days before we actually did the display. We did the display on one day. Philip, who I've always done the displays with for Ashwood, he's retired now. He tried to retire at 70, and I think he eventually managed it by 78. And but he was so important with the book. I say he translated it into English, and he put sort of commas and full stops and everything like that. Well, we've always done the displays together, and he came out of retirement to do that, and we determined it was going to be a one-off. If it worked or not, we would never attempt it again. And we were just so lucky. The weather was cool. The plants lasted a week. We got our gold medal, and they also gave us the best in pavilion, which was a huge honor. But so many tears on the stand. It was unbelievable.
So which one's this?
These are japonica doubles. This is former magna. They really are sensational. You've got, all the different variations, but and they don't have to all be complicated. You can have these wonderful singles with the coloured stamens.
And that is in a traditional Japanese pot, is it?
Yeah. Well, they create these pots, and can you see there's a really big hole at the bottom, and they have these 3 feet so that the base of the pot isn't in contact with the with the bench, so that you get absolutely the best drainage possible. That's a handmade pot in my right hand, Japanese, and the one on the left is a mass-produced one. And to be honest, the mass-produced one is better to grow plants in because it's freer draining. The other one is a little bit better made, but these are like eggshells,
What one are you holding? That is beautiful.
These are all japonica forma magna. It's funny. This is what the Japanese mainly grow, and Let's show you.
I'd love to see the whole kitchen just full of hepaticas.
It wouldn't, it's chaos. They you see from like with those sort of stripes on them, and the flowers change as they get older, you know, but often they get these green centers appear, which the Japanese call leaves. Those are like the semi-doubles, which you can still breed from.
So this is something that I'm not a botanist, and when I was reading through the book, I was trying very hard to get my head around all of the correct terminology. So obviously we've got sepals rather than petals, or sepals rather than petals. We've got petaloid stamens, pistils. All these things are quite important in describing a lot of these intricate flower forms in Hepatica.
The sepals are like the green bits on the back of a rose, and you've got the stamens, which are the male part, and the pistils, which are the female part in the center. Often, where's that one there? So in that, can you see the red of the stamens?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the center that's green are the pistils, the female part. And the actual pistils can receive pollen before that the stamen release it, so it gives this chance to cross-pollinate, which is always better, I feel, with all plants. So you don't get the inbreeding.
Big gene pool.
Big gene pool, yeah, which is fantastic. And all the species seem to be able to cross with each other. Which again, it gives you fantastic excitement. Like over here, I've got another. This is like the one on the cover of the book.
Oh, yeah.
This is japonica var pubescens, and can you see there the pistils are very dark, and the stamens are actually light pink. And you get this lovely bicolour flower. That sort of this was at the Roko Mountains near Osaka, and the Japanese were very clever because this one area is a tourist sort of site, and so they keep replanting it with the pubescens they've grown. And then I was taken to another site where they were totally untouched, and they were all very special indeed, but they vary incredibly in size.
And would I be right in saying that var pubescens is probably your favorite?
Oh, definitely. I always say I have a love-hate relationship with the Japanese hepaticas, because I always say I don't want any more. But as soon as I see them, the strength to say no goes. But you see, that's a very tiny, it's about half the size of the flower, but you've still got that dark pistil. But not all pubescens have that dark pistils in the center. But I find they're some of the most attractive, and you can also get them sort of with this lovely like edge to the flower, but they're just so special. It's
So these
incredible.
are all japonica var pubescens, and are they all ones that you've grown from seed?
I've grown a lot from seed. I have been fortunate to be being given plants, and often is like the japonica forma magna, which are the most popular are all based around Niigata. But I think, I personally feel that a lot of these cultivars have come from the radiation from Hiroshima. Down below that, you've got this the radiation which has caused this all this work with the genes and mixed everything up. Because you also find now in I went to Åland, one of the islands off Sweden. You've got Åland and Gotland, and they're in the wind path of Chernobyl. and you're getting the same sort of doublings there as well. Not to the same extent. I think the former magna have this incredible mixed parentage, which, like all ranunculaceae, hellebores, clematis, love to sort of breed with all the other different species all the way through.
And what I found fascinating in your book is that depending on who the mother and the father in that pairing is, it does really alter the result.
Yeah, well, I often think it would probably be the same in humans as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it weird because the botanists say it's the same plant, but sometimes you get an incredibly different cross, and other times you get almost identical. There doesn't seem to be. It's like some hepaticas will breed 100% true, and I think they're probably more from an isolated population, and others you get a huge range as you do in Nagata. It was harder to find two the same than there is such a range of complexity and variation.
We will have to talk about propagation and growing from seed, but alongside the nobilis and the transsilvanica we spoke about, alongside the Asian species, you also have Americana, Hepatica Americana as well.
I'll dump some of these on the floor. There's we've been it's wonderful because I can always pass the blame on for some of these changes to Tomoo, because he's like he really should be Dr. Tomoo Mabuchi, but he wouldn't let me put the doctor in. But he's his knowledge of the botanical side and the gene pool is just incredible. And with the Americans, we put them into the same species. Let me see where they are. I've got them.
It's a good job you know what you're doing, John, because if I had to go and hunt these down in your kitchen, I would never find what I needed. I'd be looking for hours.
As per usual, I'm always late. It's like my history master at school said, whatever you do, don't put a date down. You've never got a date or a time right in your life. And he was incredible. This is well, let's do it the correct way. That's that's what I think is Americana, straight Americana. It's usually in shades of, they're all pastel shades from white, pale pink, no real deep colors. And the flowers, like, they've gone up right in here because it's quite warm, but they tend to be more outward facing, a little bit like the difference between a primrose and a cowslip. The primrose is all face out and the cowslips are much stronger, and you get some wonderful fragrances. Can you smell them from there? They
Wish.
I wish. Oh, yeah. Oh, that the white is absolutely sensational. These are Acutiloba, which we have classed because Tomoo did various phylogenetic tests, and he reckons that they were all from the same species. And when I've seen them over there, you could often find the two growing fairly close together in the Appalachians, and you'd also find hybrids as well. But they're much more upright and light sturdier than the straight Americana. Again, the same range of shades, and you can find the odd double in these as well. But the scent on that white one it is absolutely incredible. Farrow, when he wrote his wonderful book on rock gardens, said Acutiloba was not worth growing, and this has been plagiarized thousands of times. But I think it is a very special plant, and it's wonderful if you cross it with nobilis and you can get these upright flowers.
And would I be right in saying that some of the Americanas are single sex flowers? So you have these beautiful, a sort of beautiful flower with no stamens.
The Japanese call it maiden form, but you also get it with the in all the other species. The beauty of having the flower with no stamens is if you cross-pollinate that with the pollen from another hepatica onto the pistils, then you stand a chance of getting these doubles or semi-doubles, because the maiden form without the pistils has no mechanism for making pistils, but it makes more sepals or petals, in the center. I find that quite fascinating. The problem is we need 3 or 4 lives. You want a life to learn about the plant, then you need another life to do it, and then third one to enjoy it, I suppose. But we're always fighting against time, and I think some of the crosses now I keep doing I won't see, but hopefully they'll continue with them. But I do love the American ones, and I've seen them over in the Appalachians, and I flew over to Minnesota and Wisconsin for 4 days, and the guy who runs Minnesota Wildflowers, Peter Zook, showed me round, and we saw some amazing things, as well as the wonderful Trillium nivale as well. Have you ever grown that?
No,
It's got greyish foliage. It was flowering at the same time, but every time I saw hepaticas growing in the wild, they were always near water, either a river or a lake, and it was always in areas of high humidity.
And it's handy for you that your garden, I think, backs onto the canal, so you might get some of that humidity.
It's the Staff's Worcester Canal, which was built by James Brindley. It's just celebrated 250 years. I can see your cat now. They come in to keep an eye on you. They just celebrated 250 years. The canal has of James Brindley.
You mentioning the plants that you spotted, the trillium that you spotted alongside Hepatica americana. There is an extra added level of joy for planty people in this book, that you are often mentioning the plants you spot them alongside in the wild, with some lovely photos. I was absolutely taken by Daphne laureola, subspecies Philippi, which was a gorgeous little Daphne, which I did spot on Pan Global Plants website. So if anyone is as taken by it as I am, then you probably can get hold of it. Whether you can grow it, I don't know. But you also have a section on growing them in the garden, and the plants they may benefit from growing alongside, and how you can get this interest in winter so that your garden can just live and give you joy all year round, which of course is our great aim on this podcast.
Well, I think a garden should be for every day of the year, and
here.
And I hate it if people say I'm going to put the garden to bed. It sort of makes me cringe, and
Alan says this almost every week in winter. Alan says, I can't believe people say they're going to put the garden to bed. I hate it when people say that.
Well, they don't realise what they're missing out on. I always tend to plant winter shrubs. I'm absolutely hooked on hamamelis, and we're trying to get into, thanks to the wonderful Chris Lane, who's got the hamamelis National Collection. He showed one of the lads how to do the grafting work, and I always plant them so I can see them from the kitchen window. And you start from, they give you the top story, and then underneath you can plant your aconites, your snowdrops, your hellebores, cyclamen coum. What a wonderful plant cyclamen coum is. You
Well,
know, it should be.
I remember seeing cyclamen coum at Ashwood Nurseries in the early days of my visiting, and I mean, we just hadn't seen the range of shades that you had. You had the most wonderful, rich, dark purpley colours, purple mauve,
Yeah.
I suppose. I don't know, magenta almost.
Yes, the only thing I always feel that it's always the dark colours which people go for, but the paler colours stand out so much better in the winter because there's so much bare soil, naked stems there.
John, John,
Yeah,
don't you find that if people are looking at a tray of cyclamen coum, they will pick the dark ones out?
definitely, definitely.
And you're absolutely right. They'll put them in their garden and they go, oh, the dark ones need the light ones to show them off, and so on. Equal, you know, one to the other kind of thing.
I think you're dead right, Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know this is a Hepatica podcast, but what a glory your river coombe is, your glorious planting of cyclamen.
Well, that's pure theatre. We replant what we call the ruin garden twice a year. I also think there's no such thing as easy gardening. It's a bit like life. You get out of it what you put into it.
And no free lunches here, John.
No free lunches. And the lads did that, and they, back 4 or 5 years ago, they did this what we call the River Coombe, and then they've done this waterfall this time. Because I have a reputation for being difficult, and because we have such a fantastic team, I try and push them every year to do something slightly different, and they come up with we all planted. We don't leave anything in the pots in that display because it can encourage vine weave, or especially in the with the tender plants, the succulents and everything. And all those plants will either be planted out in the garden afterwards or go back to this very friendly nursery next door. Which I'm so lucky with there. But I think, again, it's all because we open, well, we shut theoretically for the month of January, but otherwise we open every Saturday for charity. So we're trying to promote this gardening for every day of the year. And I don't know about you, Alan, but with grasses, we tend to leave them to see them start to grow again. The birds love dashing in and out of them and all the seeds and everything.
You only got to get one of your cold nights, John, and all those dead stems flower again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's just making the most of what you've got all the time. And just when it becomes a nuisance, then you start cutting back. We've taken some of the miscanthus, the stronger growing ones, down because they were blowing around everywhere. But some of the pennisetums and we leave right to the end because I find if you cut them back too soon, you can kill them.
Yeah, I quite agree. Lewisias is something that you used to grow an awful lot of as well.
Yeah, we still do. It was the first plant which put, I suppose, Ashwood on the national map, and that was because of Percy Picton. When I left school and started at Ashwood, if I felt down, I'd go and see Percy. Did you ever meet him?
I didn't know.
He used to do Gardener's Question Time. I've actually developed his figure now, the more rotund, and he always used to have yesterday's breakfast or dinner down his jumper. Somehow, magically, I think it's because of my love for him and his son Paul. They've got this amazing nursery at Colwall Malvern. It's now run by Percy's granddaughter, Helen.
Yeah.
Husband Ross.
Yeah.
They're just fantastic, and it's so wonderful to see like the family history. That's such a wonderful family. Like Paul's turned 80 now. Old Court Nurseries. I was struggling with the name at Colwall, but you know, the Astor collection there is sensational. But Ross has built up, you know, wonderful collections of ferns and snowdrops, and you know, the garden now is wonderful all through the year.
And if you want to see, they are favourites on this podcast, Helen and Ross. So if you would like to see an Aster special, then I'll try and link to it in the video version so that you can go and find out all about the Symphyre trichum, Aster, whichever.
Yeah, I struggle with the new names, but they are the loveliest people. And getting back to Louisias, they were given to me by Percy, and whether he was fed up with me, he said, "Don't come back till you like them." And I handed those over to Philip Bork, who did all this incredible breeding work. And when he started doing them, there was one named Yellow from Joe Elliott, which was done by Division, Harold Judd, I think it was called. And Philip developed this yellow strain, and then the dark pure reds as well. And I grow them in a dry sandstone wall. And I suppose I do get mad when people say they aren't hardy, but a lot of the sort of wholesale alpine firms who are, this sounds terrible, not so specialist, grow them in like a peaty type compost.
They do.
And they're in these big pots, and they first winter they'll die because they get soggy bottoms. None of us like soggy bottom, but I always say, if you buy those plants, which can be really good, you knock all the soil off so that they have this drainage. Yeah, repot, or if you're planting them in the garden. But even if you plant them in the garden, because all that modges round the roots and the centre, that plant can well die. But it's another thing. How many specialist alpine nurseries? You've got Aberconway Nurseries down near Bodnant. They're wonderful specialist alpine growers, but they're all disappearing. Like, it takes me 3 to 4 years to get a saleable plant in a Hepatica. That's why I charge the extortionate prices. But you know, whereas you can grow herbaceous plant in a 3-litre pot in about 3 or 4 months, you know, it's just so different.
Like the expensive snowdrops, we don't want to get started down a Galanthus route because we easily talk about them every week at length. But yeah, obviously that's why they end up being so much money. It's the years and years of hard work that go in behind the scenes. I like that we, as predicted, have sidetracked onto quite a lot of plants that aren't hepaticas, which is wonderful because the plant list will be even more brimming with things that people want to grow, and of course, you know, some great growing tips as well, like the Louisias. I did want to mention this lovely thing called transposon, which I read about in your book.
I did bring a plant in. I find that really fascinating. I've now got to find
a kitchen full of hepaticas sounds like a dream until you have to find the one plant that exhibits the characteristics you want to talk about.
I've just found something else, just to digress. That is a double, that Yoshi Ono bread.
Oh,
can you see? You've got like 3. It looks a little bit more like an ornamental cabbage. I can't say I like it, but you know, if someone offers it you can't say no. It's just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Sorry, digressing from transposon, I find this fascinating. It's all down Oh, that's scented as well. To a dodgy gene. They said that when I was in Japan. They said you're like a dog. And I said, that's not very nice. It's because I was sniffing everything. But I think when you see something for the first time, you do use all your senses. I don't know, can you see there, if I put that this that although you've got spotting on some of the flowers, and then you've got flowers with blotches on. And there's one which is almost all purple, and this is down to a dodgy gene, and which I find, but it only ever happens if you've got a pure green stem, and that's called transposon, which is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I learned so much doing the book, all this sort of thing that you don't really come across till you go into something in depth. And I think that the main thing was learning of how much I didn't know, and you could write a book on what you don't know, and hopefully maybe learn a little bit more.
Well, it's wonderful to be able to share it with people. I mean, I will now almost certainly forget half of what I've learned from reading your book. It has been such a glorious thing, but my brain does tend to, particularly now I've got a baby, just jettison information. But the fact that you can pass on the information and the propagation tips, you obviously are hooked on growing these from seed. The seed's actually little fruits.
The main thing for people to understand with the seed is when the seed is ripe and is shed, the embryo is still immature. This is why you very rarely find a Hepatica seed for sale in packets, because it should be sown fresh. I think the Alpine Garden Society do some, but the person who grows the seed for that, Diane Clements, is very careful to keep it moist till they send it out. So although the success rate may not be 100%, you still get a few. But you let me find these plants. Any minute now, you'll see me tipple over one of these pots and disappear out of view. I don't know whether you can see there. I tend to use crock pots because I find they're more forgiving, but you can grow in anything, like you can grow in any compost. The main thing, it has to be free draining for hepaticas. They're not really fussy whether it's alkaline or acid, as long as it's got plenty of nutrients. That's the other thing with them. But we sow it fresh, and I cover with it's quite a coarse gravel. I find you get less moss form if you use a coarse gravel. A lot of people think you should use the very fine because they're a fine thing, but seed leaves, the cotyledons, are very strong, and we will probably leave those about another 2 weeks to develop a bit more, so that they're easy to handle. Because when you prick anything out, you must only hold the cotyledons, never the stem, because that's causing the damage. And when you sow these pans, it's usually a month, 6 weeks after flowering. You must make sure that they're kept moist, because that embryo is still growing inside, and then the roots go down, and then the cotyledons come up. And if they dry out, or if people put them in a tunnel and forget them, they just won't germinate. But they'll germinate like mustard and cress if you do them outside in a fairly shady frame. And should we get a dry period, then you water them, give them a good soaking. I always believe that when you water, you give it a good water, and then you let it go to the almost dry stage before you water again. If I'm repotting a Hepatica, I water it 3 times consecutively to settle the compost, and then it might go for a month before I need to water that's after repotting.
And if people do sow fresh seed, they might be keeping it, making sure it doesn't dry out for a while, because it might take a year, it might take longer to germinate.
They usually germinate after the first frost. So these would have appeared about 3 weeks ago. We had about -5, -6. And then what we do then is we prick them out. And this is the only thing I personally don't do. I'm too slow at it. So some people, like the German people that came yesterday, he leaves his in the pans for 3 years. There's no wrongs or right. It's what works for you. That's the main thing. And so you only change things if you're not having success. But
very slow plants, aren't they, John?
Oh yeah, they're slow to start. So
Yeah.
we would prick them out, and the lovely Jillo, who does the pricking out of the hellebores, does these for me, and they would stay in there for a year or possibly 2 years before I sort of pot them on. And this is a pan a year later, and you can see some you get. This is a japonica form of japonica. They're all fairly similar, the colors. And what I prefer to do is create a seed strain, offer a seed strain rather than a division. We do offer some divisions of the names. Like, to my mind, and I forgot to bring it in, the best hepatica that's ever been named is one called Millstream Merlin. And it's got this incredible intense color. It's from Link Foster out in Connecticut, but it was a chance serendipity. And with all the knowledge and experience we've got, God and nature knows so much better how to do it. And it wasn't even sure whether it was Americana or Americana varacuta, which was the parent with transsilvanica, but it's sterile. It's a wonderful garden plant, as well as, in a collection. That's Hepatica Millstream Merlin.
There are obviously, that's a standout for you. Are there other named ones you would direct people towards? Because we've sort of covered the different species and their tendencies and their leaves, flowers, etc. But there are lots of named ones people might be drawn to, and I suppose some might be miffier or more difficult.
Yeah.
Which are your best that you would recommend?
I feel as, say, if you're growing them in England or the UK or Europe, you're better sticking to Nobilis or Transsilvanica to start with. Once you've grown more plants from seed, then you can experiment. And the plants haven't read the book. They don't know what they should or shouldn't do. And I always feel that's the greatest thing about a really good propagator. They haven't got two set views. You've got to be able to think out of the box. Like I was involved with the start with fantastic hellebore Rodney Davey Marble Group, Anna's Red, and they lovely people. Sadly, Rodney's died in the summer, but his wife Linda, he was colorblind and yet a fantastic breeder of plants. And Linda had to actually choose all the colors for him. But all those hybrids have come from a fertile Eric Smith, which is Sternii cross Niger in the hellebores. We got back to hellebores again. And theoretically, that should be sterile. 99% of them are sterile, but there's always that one that isn't. And so if you're blinkered and think You know, this is where overtraining can be dangerous. You know,
Yeah.
you're much better with someone with an alert, observant mind who hasn't got all these preconceived ideas, so that you're there to learn and look and notice let the plants tell you what they want. And they bred these, to my mind, well, when I saw them, I knew it was too big for Ashwood to handle. So I introduced them to micropropagation people who was absolutely fantastic with them, because they put PBR on, which I'm not a great fan of, but in this case, it was so right for all the work, you know, the work that had been done. It's a bit like all the work, say, people like Anne Wright or Joe Sharman do with the snowdrops. They're putting loads and loads of effort in. It isn't just seeing something different. They're actively trying to breed a new cultivar. With these these hybrids, they're wonderful in containers as well. The foliage can be marbled from the Eric Smithii, and anything with Niger in, the foliage tends to last longer, which is what we haven't discussed with the Hepatica maxima from Oolong Do. You
Oh,
ought to,
yes,
yeah.
let's talk about that one. This tiny island off the Korean Peninsula, which I'm fairly certain we must have spoken about with people like Blethen and Sue and Jones before, um, because it feels very familiar to me. But this little island and this endemic hepatica, which you only find there.
Whoops. um,
I love it. An
that's
armful of hepaticas.
that's Hepatica maxima. It's not called maxima because of the size of the flowers. It's because of the size of the leaves can get 6-7 inches across. The darker shade they grow in, and this only grows on the island of Oolong Do. I don't know whether you ever come across the wonderful
Thorbus.
Corbus, Ulangensis Olympic Flame. That was there. And I tend to be incredibly blinkered when I'm looking at a plant. And this is Insularis, which is another very small sort of hepatica with beautiful marbled leaves, which grows on the island of Cheshudo and other islands around there. But I hadn't realized till I got back home and was looking at my photos that they were growing under hydrangea serrata, which I also love. But I completely oblivious of that. But Maxima, the leaves are biennial. So you have the foliage last for at least 2 years. And if you're showing, I tend to cut out the centers so the flowers and the new foliage can come through without any restrictions, just to make it, I suppose, a little bit more eyeball. But they're wonderful plants to hybridize with Nobilis, which I can show you. To my mind, one of the best marbled leaf Hepatica is one called stained glass, and that's stained glass crossed onto maxima, and that's last year's foliage, which is faded. That will be really good and bright and silvery pinks when it comes out, and that is Nobilis Pyrenaica onto maxima. And again, you get this foliage with these wonderful sort of bicolor flowers. You know, I do all these crosses, and I really don't name anything. I'm an absolute nightmare, and you always hope you're going to produce something that little bit better. You know, you're always searching for perfection, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, I think you might. It is possible you found it in that when I was going through this book, I mean, it was jaw-dropping. I mean, the plants are jaw-dropping. And actually, when I came across Hepatica nobilis stained glass, which has an AGM, I writing my notes and I just wrote, wow. But then I did go back and add the foliage was so beautiful. It reminded me of a jewel orchid. You know, so patterned, so outstanding. I suppose really this actually dovetails us into the FLOMO section of the podcast, in that I instantly wrote down stained glass as one of my FLOMOs, that fear of missing out you get about flowers or plants that you see. And if you get this book, my goodness me, you are going to have a lot of it. There was another one I saw, which was an Americana, so I won't be growing it. Americana var acuta Louise Curler, an outer ruffle of pink, a central rosette of pale green. I mean, pale green and pink together. And then because of all those sepals and everything, long lasting flower. And it was one which had a lovely story behind it as well. And I love a plant with a good story.
Well, she was an amazing wildflower collector in America, and where she was so different, when people find something new, some people want to keep it just to themselves, but the best way to keep a plant is to give it away. And she not only gave it to her friends, she gave it to all the local nurseries as well. And so that is why it's still around. It's quite scarce, but it is still around. And she, that Anemonella Oscar Schoaf was another plant that she, I think, found in a churchyard again, and was handed to a nurseryman. So it is special if you find it, well, important if you find something that's very special, is to get it out there. And I find you get as much excitement as giving plants away, or more excitement giving plants away, as you do with selling them, don't you?
I'm going to have one more FLOMO before I hand over to anybody else. And it was one you posted on Instagram, and I loved it then. Then I found it in your book, and it was even more beautiful. And it was a japonica called Mori, Mori, which was green.
Oh yeah, I've got it. I've got it here. I brought it in.
Oh, I mean, this.
Yes.
I actually showed this to Alan. We were chatting on Zoom the other day, and I showed it on my phone, rudimentary way of sharing, like onto the screen, and you were wowed by it. Kind of green with a purplish centre, and then that was less open. When I saw it opened in the book, where you got a proper ruffle of purple in the centre, it was even more mind-blowingly beautiful. So it went even further up my FLOMO list.
Talk about tiptoe through the tulips. It's tiptoe through the hepaticas. This is Mori. It's actually found by Yoshi Ono. Oh no!
No.
Yeah, and it means field, I think. In Japanese, I think. I ended up, as you say, seeing hepaticas in the wild when they invited me to do a talk on hellebores in Japan. And I don't know whether you've ever done a talk where it's been translated afterwards. It takes forever. And I was gradually getting bored. And then you picked up on things like with the hellebores, there was blotched, which was blotto, so I could do it. So I could do the translation for that. And spotted was spotto. So you were going through on all these different things. But and that's another green one which comes from seed. Mori, which it's sort of not perfect flowers on that. Those are very sort of what do you say, irregular doubles, whereas that Mori, it is something special. The beauty with plants, you can have polygamy. You can fall in love with lots of different plants, can't you?
I think what you mean is you can be promiscuous without having a conscience.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, I think that's probably, that's it. You've hit the nail on the head there.
I'm assuming, John, that even though you have, do you know how many you have hepaticas in your greenhouse alone?
No, I'm terrible at details. My answer would be it's full.
Your greenhouse is full. Do you still have plants that you would like? Do you have FLOMO? Are there hepaticas in particular, or I suppose other plants that you have on your wish list that you're desperate to get hold of?
Well, I think I always used to struggle with short ears, the little ericaceous plant. In the early days when I went looking at hellebores, used to go down to the fantastic Washfield Nurseries, Elizabeth Strangburn, Peter Moore at Tile Barn Nurseries for the look at his cyclamen, and David Sampson, who grew short ears like nothing on earth. And when I went to Japan, I saw them growing like heather. You couldn't not walk without treading on them. And I've killed more than I would like to admit. So I would love to be able to grow short ears properly. I suppose there is in Hepaticas, there's another selection of Link Fosters called Millstream Pink and the Cutiloba. And I always feel any plant with the name Millstream in it, it's like the equivalent of an AGM. I've tried desperately to get hold of that and failed miserably.
Well, there we go. There's another plug. Anyone listening, anyone watching, you know the man who
Yeah,
wants it if you happen to have one or no one.
yeah, Millstream Pink. Yeah, someone might. It's funny because a lot of the Instagrams we do, because this lad who's not only a good gardener, but he loves doing all these videos, and we're doing about the Prunus cursor, flowering cherry, which is one of the traditional Japanese plants. And in 1926, Collingwood Ingram went out to give a lecture there, and they showed him these paintings of Prunus shirotai, which they said was extinct. And he knew of one that was growing in a Sussex garden, took cuttings, and then passed them, got them back out there. Like those are the stories which are fantastic. We're so, I suppose, privileged really to be able to be encompassed by this wonderful love of plants, aren't we?
Yeah, and wonderful people.
Well, it's there forever. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you have to learn. So it just goes from there.
That's where that extra lifetime comes in, John. You need it.
Alan, can I ask what your FLOMO is on this Hepatica podcast?
It's going to be no surprise, is it? I mean, my FLOMO is going to be Hepaticas, because I mean the jewels of this tribe of plant are absolutely fascinating. And I mean, I think it's either Transsilvanica or Nobilis that I've got. It's a mauvey blue, but the saturation of color on the petals is just so striking. I absolutely love it. And my FLOMO is going to be, when the next crop comes in, John, is to be have a delayed birthday present, perhaps, or is it just an excuse to be extravagant? I don't know, but I would like to have some of your seedlings in. As you say, you don't say there's shades of pink or shades of mauve or shades whatever. And I would like to do. I went to do this yesterday, but of course you're sold out. But I have an island bed in the garden we call the North Garden, and I would love that to be Hepaticas, because it's under deciduous trees, magnolias, and I just think that they would do so well there. But I don't want to have complicated plants that I don't understand. I want to be easy enough for me to. I mean, I'm not saying I won't progress. There's always room for improvement.
I think this is it. The more success you get, the more you are prepared to try.
And one little thing from your book, just before we end, John, I'm going to say, I, like you, have reached a stage of my life when I love ferns.
Yes. I can't pronounce them. I find the names very difficult, but I really do think that the polypodiums are a plant of the future. They're so much more so sensible. If the polypodiums are evergreen all through the winter, but in the heat of the summer they die down and don't come up till they've had enough rain. It's exactly. Like Yeah, and it's like Helen Dillon said, didn't she? The time to sow seeds is when you can sit on the ground and it's warm to your backside. You know, all this, it's the farmer's attitude, which is so important. And I do love them. And my previous head gardener died in his sleep, aged 27, like a cold caught death. And the last thing he did was the old stumpery. And it's doing really well. We were helped very much by Angela from Fibrex Nurseries, but sadly now that has finished.
Yes.
And it's like, as you say, us, Alan, we're getting older, and if you haven't got the kids that are keen to do it, and horticulture, it isn't the most sort of profitable thing to go in. And a lot of these places, which used to be all the nurseries in the open countryside, the towns have grown up to them and come out to where the nurseries are, and they've become building land.
Yeah, they've become eaten up. And I think there's one glimmer of hope that I find, and that is hobby growers. Because hobby growers are like mini nurserymen, if you like. I mean, they don't have big premises or anything like that. But if you go to a plant fair in the countryside, you'll find probably hobby growers there, and that they are one source of unusual plants, rare plants probably, because like you with Hepaticas, they have a plant that they particularly like, and they will grow it and they will understand it and they will learn about it and they will want to give it away, metaphorically, of course, but to spread it around.
But this is so true that it's where being an amateur or a professional, it's there's less restrictions on the amateur to be able, and as they can get to this incredible level of knowledge on one or a particular subject. And as you say, these hobby gardeners, they're absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
I always say, if I come back, I want to come back as a nurseryman again, because there's so much more I need to learn.
Haven't finished.
No, I haven't finished, but I do love what I do, and it's all I've ever done. And
well, I have to say, John, that the plants that you grow, that your nursery, they're a testament to your creativity and, dare I say, your genius, because you are a genius, whether you would believe that or not, but you are. Thank you.
Of course you won't. But it's true, and this book is testament to that as well. It is such a joy to have been able to carve out some time to properly read it. It's a travelogue, it's an ode to these plants you love so much, and also wonderfully it hands over that knowledge to all the people who happen to be able to read it and then grow these plants. And hopefully they've got some of that knowledge in this podcast as well. Thank you for filling your kitchen with Hepaticas. I wish I was there to smell the scent and see the flowers up close.
We should. I'll see if Nigel can photograph it and send it to you.
Yes, I'd love to see it.
But you've both been so wonderful. Thank you so much for thinking of me and asking me.
So if people want to get hold of some of your plants, this summer is the time to keep an eye out on your website.
There's a few, to be honest. I've because my elderly dog hasn't been very well, I haven't kept us up to date, but there are new cultivars coming available all the time. Hopefully by July, August will be available again. Yes.
I think basically just keep going back to the Ashwood website. You're there. You just buy yourself a few hellebores or a few other treats along the way. John, it has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much. And I suppose until next time, happy gardening.
Okay.
Thanks, John. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alan. Bye-bye.
I have a blooper section at the end. So if stuff goes wrong, I'm actually going like, yes.
Whoop. Can I just kill that phone?
Blooper?
And whoops. What on earth is going?
You're too popular.
It was pure white with a oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. On the east, sorry, I'm terrible at geography. I know when I first went to Japan, I called Mount Fuji Kilimanjaro, and they always seem to remind me of on the left, and then the green stems. No, are you seeing that? That's the one with the green stem. I'm looking at it, it's opposite. I wonder what that was then, Alan. You've got this thing sticking.